Welcome back to Dr. Leo Six's channel. The aim of this channel is to learn multiple languages simultaneously using a variety of methods. Today, by analyzing international affairs and exploring the US-Iran war from the perspective of the Arab world, we will learn 3 Arabic words: Al-Muwajahah, Harb, Sira'a.
Usually when we look at global conflicts, there's this expectation of really clear, neat categories.
Right, like black and white.
Exactly. You open a history book, you read a timeline, and you see an invasion or like a formal declaration of something. And historians just point to it and say, there it is, that's a war.
Yeah, it's treated as this very clean binary state.
Right. You are either at war or you are at peace.
Yeah.
But when you step into the modern geopolitical landscape, that clean timeline just completely shatters.
Oh, absolutely. It falls apart entirely.
Because today, we're looking at situations involving, surgical airstrikes, drone swarms, maritime blockades, and the terminology we use to describe it all just gets incredibly murky.
It really does. It becomes this diagnostic nightmare for international relations.
Totally.
Because you have militaries actively engaging one another, right? They're inflicting massive economic and structural damage, and yet politicians and diplomats are just bending over backward to avoid using traditional labels.
Which brings us to a really fascinating premise for today's deep dive. So welcome. Today we are exploring how understanding a massive, multi-layered global crisis sometimes comes down to decoding just one single word.
Just one word. It's pretty amazing.
It is. We're diving into a stack of historical source material and media analysis centered around a specific Arabic term. And that term is Al-Muwajahah.
Right.
We're going to look at how this one word became the definitive, undeniable label for a really complex, high-stakes conflict involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran. And our mission today is to break this down in a way that is super easy to understand, especially if you are a beginner to the intersection of linguistics and geopolitics.
Yeah, and just to set a clear baseline for this discussion, our focus today is strictly on the mechanics of language, right, and media framing.
Okay, cool.
We are looking objectively at how terminology shapes the reality of a geopolitical crisis. So we are simply analyzing the historical source material and the media narratives provided to us, completely without taking any political sides or, endorsing any specific viewpoints.
Yeah, that is super important. We're just the messengers decoding the language.
Exactly. Our goal is just to understand the descriptive power of this specific word and the lens through which this entire conflict was viewed globally.
Love it.
Yeah.
So, like we said, we want to make this completely accessible. We're keeping this totally jargon-free. So before we touch on the ballistic missiles or the drones or global supply chains, we really need to understand the structural foundation of the word itself.
Right, you have to start at the root.
Exactly. The term Al-Muwajahah literally translates in our sources to confrontation or standoff or face-to-face clash. But just reading at a dictionary definition barely scratches the surface of what this word is actually doing.
No, it really doesn't. To understand its power, you have to look at the etymology. Arabic is this incredibly mathematical language, and it's built heavily on root systems.
Okay.
Most words can be traced back to a core set of 3 consonants, and those carry a broad foundational meaning. From that one 3-letter root, you can derive dozens of related words.
Like a linguistic family tree.
Yeah, exactly like that. And for Al-Muwajahah, that triconsonantal root is WJH. In Arabic, those 3 letters combined simply relate to the concept of face or direction.
Okay, so the foundation of the word is literally just the physical concept of facing something.
Exactly, just facing. But it's the grammatical structure built around that root that gives the word its specific tension.
How so?
Well, Al-Muwajahah uses what linguists call the Form 3 verbal noun pattern.
Okay, wait, Form 3 verbal noun pattern. That sounds like the jargon we promised to avoid.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah.
Without getting deep into the grammatical weeds, the defining characteristic of this Form 3 pattern is that it carries an inherent baked-in sense of reciprocity.
Reciprocity, meaning it goes both ways.
Exactly. It describes an action that is fundamentally mutual. It is not something you do to an object. It is something you do with an active participant.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it signifies a state where 2 parties are standing literally face-to-face, engaged with one another, and crucially, neither party is willing to back down.
Okay, I love this for a beginner analogy. Think of it like an old Western movie standoff, right?
Oh yeah, perfect.
Picture the dusty street at high noon. 2 people are standing face-to-face, hands hovering over their holsters. They're locked in this incredibly intense staring contest where the first person to blink loses everything.
Right.
It's an active, highly tense two-way street. Both parties are equally participating in the creation of that tension. Like an ambush, for example, is entirely one-sided. But a standoff requires two active participants acknowledging each other's presence and the mutual threat.
That is a great analogy. That reciprocity is literally programmed into the DNA of the word. So when an Arabic speaker hears Al-Muwajahah, they aren't just hearing the English equivalent of conflict.
They're hearing the Western movie standoff.
Exactly. They are hearing a very specific structural dynamic. They are hearing that both sides are actively in the ring, trading blows or threats, and maintaining this localized, really intense equilibrium.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. If this situation is so physically intense-like, if we have actual military engagement happening, why do we need this highly specific Goldilocks word?
What do you mean?
Like, if U.S. airstrikes are actively hitting targets and Iranian missiles are physically flying through the air, how is that not just total war? People are firing highly advanced weapons at each other.
Yeah, no, it is the most natural question to ask. And the answer really comes down to the psychological and political threshold of terminology.
Okay.
In Arabic news media, precision regarding scale is everything. The standard word for war is harb.
Harb. Got it.
But harb carrying a traditional absolute and catastrophic connotation. It implies total destruction.
Like World War II level stuff.
Right. It evokes armies marching across borders, the total dismantling of a nation's military infrastructure, regime change, or a formal legal declaration of war where the entire society mobilizes. It basically means the goal is the complete erasure or subjugation of the enemy.
Okay, so harb is that binary concept of war we mentioned at the very beginning. Total commitment.
Yes. And then on the complete opposite end of the linguistic spectrum, you have a word like Sira'a, which roughly translates to conflict, struggle, or strife.
Right.
But Sira'a implies something much more prolonged, abstract, and often ideological. Like, you would use Sira'a to describe a decades-long Cold War or an ongoing diplomatic dispute over resources.
It sounds a bit too sterile.
Exactly. It completely lacks the immediate, explosive, physical heat of what was actually happening on the ground between the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
Ah, okay. So harb would imply someone is trying to completely wipe the other side off the map, which wasn't the goal here.
Right.
But Sira'a makes it sound like, I don't know, an angry debate at the UN, which totally ignores the fact that actual buildings are blowing up.
Precisely. So Al-Muwajahah acts as a linguistic pressure valve. It perfectly captures the localized, highly intense nature of this specific crisis.
It sits right in the middle.
It does. It was a unique blend of proxy warfare, using allied, non-state groups to fight indirectly, combined with direct state-to-state military engagement. But crucially, it always stopped just short of unrestrained, scorched earth warfare.
And there is also a massive real-world benefit to not using the word harb, right? Like, if a government officially calls a situation a war, they are legally and politically bound to act on it.
Oh, absolutely.
Markets panic. Global shipping insurance rates just skyrocket instantly.
Completely. Terminology dictates policy. By universally adopting Al-Muwajahah, media and political entities could acknowledge the severe, violent reality of the situation without triggering those automatic escalation traps that come with declaring a formal war.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, it perfectly encapsulates the direct military exchanges, the proxy battles, and the maritime blockades we saw in places like the Strait of Hormuz, all without overpromising the scale of the destruction.
Wow. And this grammatical reciprocity isn't just theory. You can actually see it play out physically in the military strategy.
Oh, definitely.
To truly understand why the word fits so perfectly, we have to look at the geography and the asymmetry of the actual events on the ground. Because this wasn't a case of one side simply overwhelming the other with superior firepower.
No, not at all. Historically, if you look at past Middle Eastern conflicts involving major global powers, you often see a dynamic where one nation's military infrastructure collapses relatively quickly under the weight of an overwhelming offensive.
Like a steamroller.
Exactly. When facing the combined state-of-the-art technological superiority and air power of the U.S. and Israel, a traditional symmetrical defense often just crumbles. But that rapid collapse is fundamentally not what happened in this crisis.
Right, because Iran didn't try to match them jet for jet because they just couldn't.
Right.
Instead, they mounted a very specific asymmetric counterweight. Our sources show they leveraged their distinct capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So, a massive arsenal of ballistic missiles, localized fleets of advanced drones, and their geographical dominance over the Strait of Hormuz to create maritime standoffs and blockades.
Yeah, and, the word asymmetric gets thrown around a lot in geopolitical analysis, but what it really means in practice is refusing to fight the opponent on their terms.
Right. Don't play their game.
Exactly. If your opponent has overwhelming conventional strength, you don't line up your troops in an open field to be bombed. You utilize cheaper, unconventional methods to inflict unacceptable economic or political costs.
Okay, think of it like a fight between a bear and a swarm of bees.
Oh, I like this.
Right. The bear represents the traditional military superpower.
Yeah.
It has raw strength, massive weight, and just devastating swipe power. The bees don't try to wrestle the bear. That would be completely suicidal.
Yeah, the bear wins that wrestling match every time.
Exactly. Instead, the bees use an asymmetric strategy. They swarm the bear's most sensitive, vulnerable spots. They use thousands of tiny, precise strikes to disorient and exhaust the massive animal until it decides the fight is just no longer worth the energy.
That's a fantastic visual.
Right. And in this geopolitical scenario, those bee stings are swarms of cheaper drones and the aggressive naval tactics used in the Strait of Hormuz.
And the Strait of Hormuz is the ultimate vulnerable spot for the global economy.
Yeah, explain that for a second for the listener, just so they grasp the scale.
So it is an incredibly narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Roughly 20 to 30% of the world's total oil consumption passes through that specific choke point.
Wow, up to 30%.
Yeah, so by physically threatening that artery with small, fast attack boats or drone operations, a nation can instantly spike global energy prices and create massive problems for the entire international community. They don't need a fleet of stealth bombers to exert global leverage. They just need to control the choke point.
So it is a strategic trade of blows.
Right.
One side launches a surgical airstrike. The other side disrupts a vital shipping lane. It is move and countermove. Both sides are actively getting punches in, creating that tense equilibrium we talked about with the Western movie standoff.
And that specific move and countermove dynamic is exactly what eventually forced the signing of the Islamabad Memorandum.
Let's actually expand on that, because the Islamabad Memorandum is a massive turning point in our source material. What actually drove them to that agreement?
The memorandum was essentially the physical manifestation of a mutual realization. All parties involved came to understand that a pure military steamrolling was just impossible.
They realized they couldn't punch the bees.
Exactly. The U.S. and Israel realized that Iran's asymmetric capabilities, specifically that threat to global energy markets and proxy network mobilization, made total military victory way too costly.
And on the flip side,
Conversely, Iran realized that enduring continuous high-tech airstrikes and crippling economic isolation was completely unsustainable. So the memorandum was a mechanism to de-escalate, essentially acknowledging the stalemate.
it's amazing how the military strategy on the ground perfectly mirrors the grammar of the word itself.
It really does.
Our sources highlight that the specific grammatical pattern of Al-Muwajahah, which linguists refer to as the Mufa'ala pattern, inherently emphasizes this exact mutual gambit dynamic.
Yeah.
When Arabic media uses this word to describe the events leading up to the Islamabad Memorandum, they are subtly underscoring that this was a deeply reciprocal chess match. No one was a passive victim. Everyone was actively shaping the tension.
But, and this is key, the conflict didn't just evaporate the moment the Islamabad Memorandum was signed.
Right. It wasn't suddenly sunshine and rainbows.
Exactly. It didn't instantly transition to a peaceful status quo.
Right.
The crisis simply evolved, which raises this really fascinating question about how language adapts to shifting realities.
What happened next?
Well, we saw the crisis move through phases of temporary ceasefires. We saw the implementation of complex double blockades. And eventually, the tension shifted geographically and functionally, moving away from the deserts and oceans and into deep diplomatic maneuvering in European cities like Geneva and Paris.
Wait, let's break down that concept of a double blockade before we move to Europe, because it really highlights how the conflict changed shapes.
Sure.
When we hear blockade, we usually think of naval ships stopping cargo.
Yeah.
But a double blockade operates on two entirely different planes of existence.
Exactly. You have the physical maritime blockade, the asymmetric threat in the Strait of Hormuz or the Red Sea, disrupting the physical movement of goods and oil. But simultaneously, you have a secondary financial blockade being imposed by the Western powers.
A digital blockade.
Right. This involves cutting off access to international banking systems, freezing foreign assets, and weaponizing global trade sanctions.
So one side is blocking the physical ships,
Yeah.
and the other side is blocking the digital money. It is the exact same reciprocal standoff, just fought with entirely different weapons,
Exactly.
which makes the transition to the diplomatic phase make complete sense. They basically took the standoff from the ocean and dropped it right onto a mahogany table in Paris and Geneva.
Yeah, the battlefield just moved from military engagements to high-stakes diplomatic boardrooms. They were negotiating the terms of these ceasefires, attempting to trade sanctions relief for maritime security and limits on missile production.
Right.
And normally, when a conflict undergoes a transition, that drastic moving from active airstrikes in the Middle East to guys in suits sitting around a table in Switzerland, you would expect the terminology in the news to completely fracture and change.
Yeah, you totally expect a shift from words of violence to words of negotiation or like peace talks.
But the sheer elasticity of the word Al-Muwajahah meant the Arabic media didn't need to invent a new term or confuse their audiences. They just seamlessly transitioned from calling it Al-Muwajahah al-Askariya, which translates to the military confrontation.
Straight into Al-Muwajahah ad-Diplomacia, meaning the diplomatic standoff.
Yes. The core noun, the root of the concept, remained entirely unchanged. The underlying nature of the interaction hadn't shifted at all.
They were still face-to-face.
They were still face-to-face. They were still operating with that baked-in reciprocity. They were still stubbornly refusing to back down. They had merely swapped ballistic missiles and drones for trade sanctions and diplomatic leverage.
That is just unbelievably efficient for public communication. I mean, think about how much English language media struggles to categorize complex, evolving events.
No, it's a mess.
One week, the headline calls it a war. The next week, it's a crisis. Then it's a trade dispute. Then we are magically in peace talks. We use a million different disjointed labels depending on what happened that specific morning, which creates massive cognitive dissonance for the public trying to follow along.
Yeah, it makes it hard to see the big picture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here, this single word acts as this unbreakable umbrella over the entire timeline. It scales perfectly from a drone strike in the desert to a tense, frozen handshake in Geneva.
It proves that the standoff wasn't just a physical event that happened on a specific Tuesday. It was the defining character of the relationship itself. The medium of the fight changed, but the posture of the fighters did not.
Okay, so what does this widespread linguistic efficiency mean when we look at the bigger picture of how the world consumes news? Because the Middle East, as a geopolitical region, is not exactly known for its widespread political consensus.
No, it is not. And that is arguably the most striking and important takeaway from the entirety of our source material today.
Really?
Yeah, because this provided a rare moment of near absolute media consensus across a highly fractured and politically polarized region.
Wow.
When you look at the headlines of mainstream Arabic outlets across the board, regardless of who owned them or funded them, the defining phrase universally became the confrontation between Washington and Tehran, anchoring entirely on the word Al-Muwajahah.
And what makes this media consensus so shocking is the reality of the media landscape in the Middle East. It is incredibly divided along ideological lines.
Very much so.
On one hand, you have massive media conglomerates leaning toward the Gulf states. Their primary editorial concern is usually regional stability, the continuous flow of global energy markets, and, protecting maritime security.
Right, because their entire economic survival relies on oil tankers safely passing through places like the Strait of Hormuz. So when Gulf-leaning media used the word Al-Muwajahah, they were actively emphasizing the reckless threat this standoff posed to global commerce.
They were highlighting the danger.
Exactly. They were highlighting the danger and the disruption caused by the reciprocity.
Right. And then on the complete opposite end of the political spectrum, you have media outlets leaning toward what's often referred to as the axis of resistance.
Yes.
Their primary editorial narrative is entirely focused on pushing back against Western, U.S., and Israeli influence in the region.
And when those outlets use the exact same word, Al-Muwajahah, they were emphasizing something entirely different. They were emphasizing strategic deterrence.
Wow.
They were framing the exact same standoff as a successful, necessary, and heroic stand against imperialism. For them, the reciprocity of the word proved that they could go toe-to-toe with a superpower and hold their ground.
Okay, so let me make sure I have this right. Even though these two sides fundamentally disagreed on who the good guys and bad guys were, and they completely disagreed on the moral and political justification for the violence.
They completely agreed on the structural nature of the fight.
That is wild.
It is, precisely. Regardless of their political angle or their end goals, Al-Muwajahah was the undisputed consensus summary of the geopolitical drama. It was basically the only word robust enough to hold all those deeply competing narratives at once without breaking.
It's the perfect container.
Yeah, it accurately described a situation that was spiking global energy markets, forcing the creation of the Islamabad Memorandum, and driving bitter negotiations in Europe, all while accurately capturing the localized, intense military reality on the ground.
Man, it is just a profound testament to the sheer descriptive power of precise terminology.
It really is.
You know, when we started this deep dive, we promised to decode a single word, and it might have initially felt like a beginner's vocabulary lesson. But pulling back the curtain on Al-Muwajahah has actually revealed the entire mechanical anatomy of a massive global crisis.
We really covered a lot of ground.
We did. We've traced the concept from its root meaning of a literal face-to-face posture through an asymmetric battlefield of drone swarms and physical choke points in the Strait of Hormuz, through the mutual realization of the Islamabad Memorandum, all the way to high-stakes double blockade diplomacy in Paris and Geneva.
And it serves as a powerful, necessary reminder for anyone trying to navigate the overwhelming flood of news today. Knowledge is most valuable when we look critically at how information is delivered to us.
The packaging matters.
The linguistic frameworks we use matter immensely. A single, carefully deployed word can hold the weight of entire military strategies, geographic realities, and complex diplomatic outcomes.
It really makes you fundamentally rethink how you read a headline, which honestly brings the conversation full circle back to where we started. We talked about how comforting it is to look at a historical timeline and see clear, clean, binary categories: war or peace, black or white.
But the modern geopolitical reality is rarely that clean. The lines are just always blurred.
They are, and understanding those blurred lines is how you actually stay informed. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over on your own.
Okay.
We just spent all this time unpacking how a single Arabic word contains so much intricate, built-in context: the grammatical reciprocity, the threshold of localized intensity, the asymmetric strategy, and the stubborn mutual refusal to back down.
Yeah.
If all of that rich, explanatory detail is contained in just one single word, what essential truths about global events are lost every single day when we rely solely on simple, flattened, one-word English translations in our daily news feeds?
It really makes you wonder how much of the actual story we are missing when we only look at the direct translation rather than trying to understand the deeper meaning.
It absolutely does. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
That concludes today's podcast. Through our analysis of international affairs and news from the Arab world, we have learnt 3 Arabic words: Al-Muwajahah, Harb, Sira'a. We hope that by continually building on our knowledge, we can keep learning and improving, and embrace the diversity of the world and its cultures. Please do subscribe to Dr. Leo Six's multilingual learning channel.